3 weeks from today, you could be spending your first night in Downing Street as our new Prime Minister. Are you ready?
Yes, I know that we've got to earn every vote and not a seat has been won yet, and therefore I'm not complacent about it. But I've spent 4.5 years changing the Labour Party, getting it into a position where we could put our offer before the country. We unveiled our manifesto, a manifesto for wealth creation and for growth, to fix the fundamentals and take our country forward. So yes, we've prepared, we're ready, but
It's interesting that the wealth creation stuff, I think this kind of popped up in Labour rhetoric over the last couple of weeks or so, but it's very funny to me that this seems to be the central theme of what they're going with, growth and wealth creation. It's all very Trussian, isn't it?
I'm conscious that every single vote has to be earned, and we're still at the stage of earning the votes.
And in order to earn them, many of our viewers are telling us that they still don't really know what you stand for. And what I want to just say to them is this is an important sales brochure, if you like, at election time, but it's your instincts, it's your values that may matter as much. So can we examine the evidence together of what Keir Starmer stands for and who he is? Quite a few subjects to get through. Let's start with the big promise at the heart of this manifesto. Change. That's what it says on the front cover. Now, you say to people the country is broken. And yet when I examine the changes here, they're very small. Why so?
A good question, because it's just continuity politics with very, very slight tinkering around the edges. As I said before, I've said it again, it says change on the front, but they are missing the words before it, which is nothing will fundamentally change.
I don't accept they're very small. What we've set out in the manifesto is a plan for change, a plan to grow the economy. I think that amongst the biggest problems of the last 14 years has been that the economy has been flat. We haven't grown the economy, and therefore we haven't had the money to put into our public services, which are crumbling, and we haven't been able to raise living standards. So we have to have a plan for growth. This is a bold plan for growth, and it's got within it tough things we're going to have to do, like changing the planning regulations, like having a national wealth fund, like having a new industrial strategy, a new skills strategy, and making sure that we set up enterprises like GB Energy, a publicly owned energy company.
It's not a publicly owned energy company. It's an investment fund. It's literally the National Wealth Fund you were talking about. Just that specifically is the vector that you use your wealth fund to invest it in private energy companies. Again, this is going to be share equity in private companies, and it's not even going to be majority share equity because they're expecting £3 of private investment for every £1
literally a communist
of public investment. That's what they're actually proposing here. And I said, it's fine. It's not a terrible policy. It's going to be a way of at least attracting some private capital to the UK following Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, and should get us a non-zero amount of extra economic growth. That's fine. The planning system regulations are fine, but it's still not fundamental change, really, is it? It's not. And it's also not guaranteed to work. And it's also not guaranteed to grow the economy either.
You were very clear when you launched this that you hadn't got a magic wand to solve the country's problems overnight, and you've stressed, as you just have, that growth is the key to everything. We'll talk some more, I promise you, about growth. Let me tell you what I meant by small, though. You see, in this manifesto, there's a promise on schools, for example. You say Labour will recruit an extra 6,500 teachers. How many extra teachers per school is that over 5 years?
Well, I haven't broken it down per school, to be perfectly honest, Nick.
One extra teacher for every 3 schools
but it's
over 5 years. That's a third of a teacher per school.
Two things I'd say about that. Firstly, that is set out in the manifesto very clearly as a first step, a down payment. One of the steps that I hope that we'll be taking literally on day one in government, starting down that recruitment.
The problem as well is that this plan that they have, this commitment, this first steps that they've got, which includes recruiting police officers and teachers and doctors, they're not saying how they're going to do this. They're not offering them any money or any incentives. There's no mythical magic teacher tree that they can pull these down from, right? Especially when unemployment, it's going up, but it's still pretty low. Our workforce participation rate might be low, but loads of people are off sick. Again, it will take upfront investment in things like the NHS to get people off of our long waiting list to make them economically active again. But you're also going to need to have some kind of strategy to make these particular vocations appealing to people who you want to upskill into the role of teachers, doctors, whatever, and you're not going to be able to do that immediately, which you say you want to do immediately, especially since you want to recruit only from within the UK population, and you're trying to wean the NHS off migrant labour. And again, you can want to do all of these things all you want. I'm not impugning the desire to do these things. Plenty of people want less migrant labour in this country. Plenty of people want more doctors. That's something that the public want. What I'm contesting here is that either of these things are possible at the same time. Because they are not. Clearly something's going to have to give. Unless, of course, you believe there is a magic doctor tree that doesn't exist.
The second thing is the particular problem that we're aiming this at is the lack of teachers in specific subjects in secondary school. So to give you an example, we don't have enough maths teachers in our
Fucking
state secondary schools.
neoliberalism.
So people watching this who've got
Guys, let's
children
just
in
use the
state
spare
secondary-
capacity in the private sector. Right? Right?
I know, right? All that spare capacity that just somehow exists, yeah. It's all very silly, isn't it?
teachers in our state secondary schools. So people watching this who've got children in state secondary schools will know that, or be familiar with the supply teacher, the PE teacher teaching maths. We have to fix that. And that's what the 6,500 teachers is about. It's a first step. It's billed as a first
A
step.
small first step.
Fucking
Well, it's
neoliberalism.
described as tiny by some of the independent experts. Let me
I mean, it is tiny.
give you another example if I can.
Just on that, if a child doesn't have a maths teacher at the time they need it,
Oh, it's a big deal for them. Understood.
well, it's not a one-year problem, a two-year problem, a budgeting problem.
But the thing is, the issue, of course, with like maths and science teachers, they're not being taught by PE teachers because there aren't enough maths teachers that are being employed. There are a bunch of unemployed maths teachers who haven't been utilised. We don't have people who have the necessary degrees to teach this. There are not enough people who have the teaching qualifications to be able to do this. Well, my first step is to get more maths teachers teaching. What are you going to do? Are you going to get people like fast track through PGCEs in like 6 months or something? It's not much of a first step if they've got to go through all of the teacher training and then be able to teach people first time. Like, I've studied physics for 4
I'm
years.
literally a communist.
I could probably do secondary school maths. I do remember at least most of like the maths I studied at A level or whatever. I'm not going to be able to just teach people off of the bat. Especially when, as people have pointed out in chat, people who even do have the qualifications, who do have the necessary teaching qualifications, don't want to do it because the pay sucks and the ethos sucks of what they expect teachers to do within the DOE.
That will live with them for the rest of their lives because they may not be able to go on to do A levels. Apprenticeships hard to get if you haven't got maths. So it is it is a very meaningful change for the children that need it.
Meaningful, but relatively small. Let me give you another example. The NHS. Big sounding promise, 2 million extra NHS appointments a year. There were around 150 million appointments last year. So 2 million extra isn't very much. And let me just illustrate that in terms of the budget of the NHS. Big numbers, hard to grasp. So what I've got in here is the NHS budget, 100 pennies to illustrate them. Let's do that. There's the NHS budget. So how much more is Sir Keir Starmer promising? There we are. Not even 1 penny. It's not even 1% of the budget.
And that's the thing. That's a really good point by Nick Robinson, because I think what Starmer's team have done in their first steps, in their kind of marquee promises, is promise some numbers that seem big and abstract, so that they look like fancy promises to the public of changes that they're going to be able to make. But once you put it in context, once you visualize it, like Nick Robinson has done here, you realize just how small fry it is. In fact, there was an article that came up on my feed today. It was tweeted out by Andrew Fisher, the ex-Corbyn policy advisor. If you look here, Labour and Tories would both leave the NHS worse off than under austerity by the Nuffield Trust. Like, again, they are promising austerity budgets, and unless you visualise it, it's difficult for the public to take account of what those numbers actually mean in reality, rather than just in abstract. And it's a clear rhetorical device that they've used to hoodwink the public into thinking this isn't an end to austerity, when it absolutely is a continuation of austerity. That's exactly what they're promising, is a continuation of austerity. And they're trying to hoodwink the public into thinking that that's not what they're doing through clever rhetorical trickery. It's just like trying to differentiate between a millionaire and a billionaire if you contextualise it elsewhere.
That you're adding. It's a small promise.
Well, again, it's a first step. It's a down payment. It's 40,000 extra appointments and operations each and every week. So that means operating theatres operating weekends and evenings, 40,000 extra a week. That's 2 million a year. And that means that we can get that waiting list down, which is the best part of 8 million.
Providing you don't use all that money for paying off the doctors, you see. You've said you'll sort the doctors strike. You might have the doctors, you've got mental health, you've got GPs, A&E. That could take up that 1p that I put down there, the 1%.
Nick, that is specifically for these 40,000 appointments. And we've set up the model that we want to operate. And I do push back on this idea that
saying we've set up the model we want to operate is not an answer to where are you going to find this funding for doctors' pay disputes and all of the extra recruitment and all of the extra investment into new infrastructure. That's not an answer to that question. You're being asked specifically because you're the one who wants to have everything fully costed. There's nothing in our manifesto that requires raising taxes, for example. All these canards they've come out with. You can't just say, well, that's a plan that we've got. No, you need to explain to him in financial terms how you're going to justify what's going to pay for all of these extra doctors, all of this extra staff, all of this workforce plan, and indeed on top of that, solving the pay dispute with the junior doctors. You're going to have to be able to put this to people. I think costed manifestos are pointless. I understand why people do them. But you're the one who's bandied about this household budget nonsense. You've got to answer in those same terms that you're putting to the public here, Keir. You can't just say, well, that's our plan, vote for the mystery box. You're being asked a real question here.
It doesn't really make much difference. If you're on a waiting list right now watching this programme, it makes a huge difference if you can get off that waiting list. I have no end of people coming up to me saying, I've been on a waiting list 12 months, I've been told it's going to be another 18
nothing.
months. That is physically uncomfortable for...
No, stop regaling me with tales of people that you've stood near. Stop trying to pretend the random anecdotes of what people have told you about how hard it is being on a waiting list. That's not policy. That's not costing. That's not funding. That's nothing. This seems to be his entire political campaign. It's just nonsense anecdotes. Think of these people I've stood near.
For people, they're often in pain. It also means, in many cases, they can't get back into the labour market. So, again, it's a first step.
If you don't spend the money on other things, you see, and the problem that you have, you'll know, it was all over the front pages of the newspapers on the day after your manifesto launch, which is the independent experts, the people that we respect about the public finances, say, look, Keir Starmer would have more money. He's actually going to have less money because baked into the Treasury's figures that you and the Labour Party have accepted, are £18 billion of cuts. That's about 10% of the NHS budget. That's a third of all schools in England would close. You're not being open with people about that, are you?
Well, look, two things there, Nick. Firstly, on the NHS, we've set out the first steps, which is the 40,000 appointments. But we've also made it clear in the manifesto that we want to reform the NHS, that we want to make sure that we move to a preventative model where we are catching issues and diseases and scanning much, much earlier, where we're intervening earlier, making much more use of...
It's clear. This guy's had training. This guy's clearly had training. Again, I worked in sales. I know what this is. You take the broad strokes of what people are saying, and you say things like, well, I get that you have an issue with here, but what we've done is we've set up these first steps. Go back to the points you've been trained to repeat to get them into the public consciousness over and over and over again. Just repeat, all of those same talking points. And then when it comes to the question, see, you even saw it in the last one as well. He went, okay, well, we've got these things, but those are our first steps. And then he had to get cut off by Nick Robinson. Very, very clever way of avoiding the point that's being made here. Very kind of Blairite thing to do. Blair was really good at this.
Technology, and to give an example, AI working with a radiologist is 6 times better.
He's talking about like AI and preventative models for the NHS. This wasn't the question that he was asked. He was asked about the funding shortfall for underprotected departments that's been identified by the IFS, that he's already accepted those figures. But he's been allowed here to just completely straw man, to completely move the goalposts and completely shift the topic of the discussion. Very clever.
Scanning early for cancer, that's hugely important.
But what about that 18 billion, you see? Do you accept the figure exists? Will you say now that Labour under Sir Keir Starmer will not cut the courts, the prisons, the roads, council budgets and so on?
Well, as far as public services are concerned, obviously, I ran one for 5 years, the Crown Prosecution Service. I believe in our...
Bingo. Literally every single time. We saw this in the Beth Rigby discussion too. Whenever he was asked about the future of public services and the austerity that's baked in, he never answered the question. He just said, you can trust me with public services. I ran a public service. I was the director of public prosecution. I reformed that just like I reformed the Labour Party. Just repeating these phrases over and over and over again. Does this answer the question? No, of course it doesn't.
Public services, and I want to see them properly run and properly funded.
Sure,
That's
but will they be
fundamental
cut?
to me. Firstly, there'll be a cash injection straight away into our police, into our hospitals, into our schools, our first step. So that's the first thing that we will do.
Those are all protected departments. Council budgets, the ones going into Section 114 notices, the ones that you've already promised you won't be bailing out with government money. That's unprotected. That's where the cuts are. Education and health are both protected.
We will also carry out reform. I know from running a public service that, yes, you can put more money in the top and you get a slightly better product. But if you want a really better service, then you've got to reform. And we will have to do public service
I'm
reform.
hearing that. And forgive me, I think
the
the
third thing
viewers
is-
will say the question was, will there be cuts in other areas? And the independent experts say there will be cuts in other areas unless you borrow more or tax more or grow the economy incredibly fast. So are you saying there will be cuts or not?
Well, Nick, firstly, we're not going back to austerity. I ran a public service during
Literally, again, just we're not going back to austerity. I ran a public service. This isn't the question that you were asked. There are £18 billion of cuts to unprotected departments. Answer the fucking question. Jesus. Trying to get blood out of a stone with this guy. Just lie after lie after lie after lie. I can't believe people are going to make this man Prime Minister. I really can't. Genuinely cannot believe how people are going to make this completely deceitful man Prime Minister.
You are a liar.
Because I already called out that he would just say the phrase, there's no return to austerity. Even though £18 billion of public sector cuts, I won't do the Stephen Flynn accent, honestly. He won't even acknowledge the question.
austerity. I know what that feels like. I know the damage that it did. And that's been the legacy of the last 14 years. So we're not going to go to austerity. But secondly, I do want to take on this challenge that you rightly put to me.
It's really important to understand as well. I'm sorry I just keep pausing, but it's really important. The line about we need to reform our public services to make them more efficient. This is exactly the line that David Cameron took when he did austerity in 2010. He said, there isn't any money left, but don't worry, you won't see drops in service provision, because whilst the budgets are going down, we're going to find efficiencies. We're going to reform our public services. Think of the Lansley reforms, for example. And these reforms will make them work better. So when we take money away from these departments, you will not see a drop in service provision. The unfortunate part, of course, is that these were already incredibly efficient services. We had a very efficient public sector in this country, and we had done for a very, very long time. There were no efficiency savings to be found. So when he did these public sector cuts, there were no efficiency savings, and all it actually led to was a reduction in service provision. Is there just going to be this magical moment where Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves and all of these people just magically find all of these inefficiencies that the massively cutting government of Cameron and Osborne just didn't find? I find that difficult, especially since that in our healthcare service, the only real inefficiencies that we have are the private sector subcontracting that involves inefficiencies in the budget due to paying off shareholders and CEO. And they're not going to get rid of those, they're going to increase those, because West Streeting has been very happy to increase those. There is no efficiency savings to be made. This is what he's dog whistling towards here. And yes, exactly the same lines we heard from George Osborne. There's no money left. They've run out of the government's credit card. Lines that have been repeated by Darren Jones recently as well. The Chief Secretary to the Treasury Shadow Minister, who is going to be the one who, apart from the Chancellor, Rachel, is going to have his hands on the books. And he's already saying the same kind of neoliberal magic money tree style garbage that the Conservative Party have been rattling around for 14 years as they did austerity that whole period. This is a dangerous man and a dangerous government that's going to be coming into our politics and coming into government on the 5th of July.
In relation to tax and spend, because the assumption of those that are saying these are the forecasts is that we cannot do any better than we've done in the last 14 years. That, in other words, it's impossible to grow the economy, and therefore you're going to have to
Back
tax
to your
more
magic wand,
or
aren't you?
spend
It's
less.
always, when you're asked a tough question, you go, I've got a magic wand. It's called growth.
No, it's not a wand, it's a plan. That's the complete difference. Our manifesto that we
Come on. It's not a wand, it's a plan. If you had a plan for how much you were going to grow the economy, you would have OBR projections. You would have some kind of projected growth plan of how your economic investment plans are going to grow the economy and how those tax receipts are going to be used, the additional tax receipts, to plug the gap in the nation's finances. But the IFS have done the projections already, and they have told us already we're going to get £18 billion of public sector cuts. Answer the question. This is literally the answer to the question that you need to be making here, and you're completely avoiding it.
We launched is the culmination of 4 years' work, working with business partners, working with others about what is the change. So I say to every sector, what is inhibiting the growth that you need? And they say to me, let's take big infrastructure projects. Planning. We can't get our roads, our rail, all of our projects are massively over budget and overdue because of planning.
Well,
Industrial
let's ask you a question about them then, so I'm clear then.
No, but
Sorry,
Nick,
let's not go through a list. Let's deal with one at a time. Planning. Let's ask you that. Are you saying now, because I need to get the economy growing, what I will do is say to someone who's objecting to electricity pylons going across the field near their house, sorry, they've got to be built. We've got to get the economy moving. If you're worried about that huge new housing development, sorry, that has got to be built. Are you prepared to make enemies to make the economy grow?
Yes. We're going to have to be tough. We're going to have to change the way things are done. I'll give you one short example. I won't take long, but it makes my point. I spoke to the CEO of an energy company, say, how long would it take you to put a wind turbine farm up? He said, I could do it in 2 years. He said, you wouldn't get any power out of it for 13 years because I'd lose 5 years to planning, another 6 or 7 years before the grid connected. We cannot go on like that.
I'll give you another
We've got to
example
take
if I
tough
could.
decisions.
Sorry to rush you, but there's quite a lot to get through. Are you willing to make enemies on Brexit? Any business, big business will say to you, if you want to grow the economy, get rid of those barriers, or at least minimise those barriers. Now, to do it, you're going to have to look at people who voted leave and say, look, I'm sorry, we need to get closer to the EU to grow our economy.
Well, Nick, we obviously had a referendum on this. I campaigned to remain, I voted to remain, but the vote was to leave. We've left and we're not going back into membership of the EU.
You're not that keen on
means
growth.
The single market, the
No, but you're not
customs
that keen on growth then.
Well, 2 or 3 things about that, Nick. The first is, I do think we can do better than the botched deal that we got under Boris Johnson. I think every business...
Because I think that it's absolutely fine to say that there is a problem with our economy because of Brexit, right? But we also get economic opportunities because of the monetary financing of government spending that we can now do now outside the Lisbon Treaty. So the thing is, if we changed our economy to be more kind of like what the left wanted out of Brexit, that'd be great. We could do things like that. But they are sticking to a fundamental framework that was failing before Brexit. So, you know, if you wanted to keep the kind of globalized international market that we want to be a part of by remaining part of the single market and the customs union, then, you know, that would probably be fine. That probably would do good things for our economy. But is it what people voted for? Well, no.
Thinks that. So if there are businesses that are watching this, yes, I hear what you say about the barriers to trade, and we are going to do something about that. But the second thing, and I think this is important, is if you look at the problems for growth over the last 14 years, they were there, or many of them were there, before Brexit. So the idea that the sort of single silver bullet is simply the relationship with the EU is not something I accept.
But you're willing to
planning,
take people on.
Industrial strategy, skills,
Understood.
these are all issues that are there, have been there, and we need to grapple with.
We are inevitably going to move on to tax in just a second. Underline.
I mean, having an industrial strategy is easier outside of the European Union. Not having to worry about things like competition laws allows you to have a really kind of pinpoint China-style industrial strategy on how the government directs industry. But we're not revoking any of the EU-based competition laws, so...
I think the questions that people are asking about you, and you, when you launched your campaign, said, I've got to win people's trust, you said, on money and on borders and security, and we'll come to those other two. Is this question of who you really are. I want you just to look at a photograph here. Sometimes this is who you are. You know, there's Tony Blair, there's Keir Starmer. Spot the difference. Yeah, and
Well, Tony hasn't got his tie done up.
and the last election, yes, and it is looking a bit more ruffled. At the last election, let's have a look at how you looked. There you are with Jeremy Corbyn. Now, you said to voters, when you had said that he would make a brilliant prime minister, when you said you were 100% behind him, when you said he was your friend, you effectively said to us, I didn't really mean it. I had to say
And
it
if I'm going to
because I wanted to get
live
Labour
rent-free in
MPs
his
elected.
head-
Isn't the problem you've got, if you didn't mean what you said then, how do we know that you mean what you say now?
You are
So-
a liar.
Thank you, Mick Lynch, for elucidating my point for me. Yeah, if you say one thing when you don't mean it, and then you contradict that
and if
later
I'm going to live rent-free in his head,
by saying something that contradicts it, what do you call that, Nick? What do you call somebody who says things that they know aren't true deliberately? What do you call that? What's a way? What's a word that you could use to describe a person who says things that they know aren't true and they don't mean? Oh, actually, over and over and over again, like compulsively, one might say. What would you call somebody who compulsively does the thing where they say things that they know aren't true? What would you call? What's a word that you could use? Very succinct, 2 syllables maybe, about how you would describe a person that does those things. I think chat has got it. He'll be a liar. You call that lies. It's called lying.
That
It's what-
is a disgrace.
Because the man is a liar. The man is absolutely a liar.
Well, Nick, what I said was I didn't think we would win the last
You are a
election
liar.
in 2019. I don't think many people did. I'd be surprised if you yourself did. I remember the sense of foreboding when Parliament went up for that election, the sense that we were never going to win this election.
But your Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, she didn't say make a brilliant Prime Minister. She didn't even serve him.
No,
there are lots of very good Labour MPs who just said, I don't agree with this guy. I'm not going to allow things out of my mouth that I don't believe.
Yeah, Nick, look, people took different positions. I accept that.
Yeah, other people didn't lie. You know what? Fair play to the Labour Together
You
people.
are a liar.
They stayed in the party knowing they didn't agree with everything to try and usurp the party later, but at least they kept their head down and pretended that they were being silent. You, however, you lied. You deliberately and maliciously lied. You openly lied. And he needed to lie as well, because he needed to be close to Corbyn to win over the left-wing members of the party. He needed to be close to Corbyn to win over the left-wing members of the party so that they would trust him when he was going to lie to them again about the policy prospectus that he was putting forward to be his Labour leader. They had this all worked out from the start in the halls of Labour Together. They had it all worked out. You've got the trust of the people. You've served in the shadow cabinet. Therefore, when we lied to them with pledges, they'll believe you. And we did.
In 2016, I decided I would serve in the shadow cabinet because I thought that it was very important that we had an effective front bench on the question of Brexit, which dominated those years, 2016 to 2019. I thought that almost irrespective of the leadership of the Labour Party, this was going to frame the country for many years to come. And it was important to be on the front bench.
Here's
Now, I
another
accept
reason-
that
here's another reason I asked.
Yes, he wanted to be on the front bench so that he could try and railroad in the second referendum policy. That was one of a large number of reasons that the election campaign was tanked in 2019. This election that he knew they were going to lose. Yeah, he was one who pushed this election losing policy. I'm not saying they would have won if they'd have done a different Brexit policy. It was clear that the public had their vast disagreements with a lot of Corbyn's issues on terms of national security and foreign policy, but whatever, that's by the by. They especially hated Labour's position on Brexit, and a lot of red wall voters abandoned them over this. And Keir Starmer, he full-throatedly supported the second referendum. In fact, a usually meek Keir Starmer in cabinet meetings was reported to be forceful and outspoken in a way he'd never been before, specifically for the second referendum policy. Makes you think, chat, what he was doing, doesn't it?
They
Skip to
took
me.
a different
Sure.
approach. I accept that. But
Here's another
I
reason
thought
I
it was
ask.
important to be there.
2 Keir Starmer manifestos. There's this week's, and here is the one you ran to be leader under. They couldn't be more different. I mean, let's take this issue of tax that people are raising. Here you talk about economic justice. You talk about a core principle. You say, I'm in favour of increasing income tax for the top 5% of earners. This is no new taxes. This is, yes,
You
new
are a
taxes.
liar.
People are not sure what you really stand for.
I'll tell you, Nick, he was lying the first time. It's not people unsure what he stands for. We all know he's a liar. There was never, ever any intention of running on those policies. We've heard so many people, so many journalists, so many Labour Party insiders. Just a couple of days ago, Ben Bradshaw was essentially just admitted it was all lies, but he was speaking to a different electorate. He was going to lie to the Labour electorate and then win them over. Ed Miliband never did this. Tony Blair never did this. They never pretended they were more left-wing than they were to win them over. This is the first time that it's been like an open display of contempt for the membership with this kind of litany of lies. There was never any intention of sticking to these pledges whatsoever. None at all. You can't just say, well, people don't know who you are. We know who he is. This is who he is. He is a liar. It's not more difficult than that. And also, given that this is a position that he's held for years now, why is it that it's only taken until 3 weeks until this man is going to be coronated the new Lord Protector of the UK with the biggest majority in history, that it's taken people to criticise this, that it's taken our press to go, maybe he was lying, maybe this is somebody who has said contradictory things, almost deliberately so. Why is it taken up to now for this level of scrutiny to happen? Pathetic.
Well, I took a decision, Nick, that we had to change the Labour Party and drag it closer to the country. And I did that having thought long and hard about the last 4 elections, because we lost in 2010, 2015, 2017, 2019.
You are a liar.
I took the view that that was because we had drifted too far from working people, our central purpose. We had drifted to a place where we were essentially looking and...
That's not even true. Like, they drifted too far away from pensioners. Like, that's who they drifted too far away from. And it's fine, right? It's fine that you want to target a part of the electorate that usually wouldn't vote for you, right? It's fine if you want to do that. It's fine to say, look, working age people vote for us, but we seem ideologically out of sync with the retired, who are broadly patriotic, who broadly want to see their pensions protected, who want to see immigration come down, who want tougher policy on law and order, right? Just say it, just admit it. Stop lying that somehow the people who don't vote for you are working people. Working age people won a plurality of Labour votes in 2019. Even 2019. Working age people plurality voted for Labour. In 2017, even more than that. But in 2019, the famous electoral oblivion defeat, working age people in their plurality voted for Labour. In fact, the only working age demographic that didn't vote in long income distribution for Labour plurality was people who earned £100,000 a year or more. And they voted Lib Dem. It was just the retired. And again, you could admit, it's fine to admit, we were chasing the votes of the retired who we lost on Brexit and on taxation, on foreign policy, on progressive issues, whatever. That's fine. But admit it. Admit that that's what you were doing. Don't just lie. Don't just lie about this wanting to come close to working people, because it's not true. It's just not true, is it?
And feeling like a party that was looking down on people across the country, and we got very badly beaten in 2019.
I think the underlying question is, did you mean it when you said it? Do you mean what you're saying now? Well, I think is the people know that you can change your mind. They know times change.
Well, I have changed my mind.
But no, there was no changed mind. Oh, come on, Nick. This is pathetic. This is pathetic journalism. This is pathetic journalism for you to say, oh, you should change your mind. It's not a problem. No, the whole pledges, they were all lies. Everyone admits that they're all lies now. Because, of course, the left are allowed to be lied to. It's fine to lie to the left. We are not political actors worth considering. And everyone admits it. We're a different electorate, in the words of Ben Bradshaw.
And the reason for that is, having reflected politically on those 4 losses in a row, I took the decision that we needed to change the Labour Party and drag it closer to the country.
Let's talk about what you do say in this.
Nick, what I would also say this. I think that it's very important that we've got to a position now. We are very firmly saying country first, party second, and that has to dictate decisions. So
let's talk about tax, can we, in this document?
Yeah, but just
I'll give you a chance to talk about it.
I'll finish just this point, and then, of course. So when I look at anything that was said or done before by me or anybody else, the prism or the test I put it through now is it truly country first, party second? If the answer to that is yes, then off we go.
That means nothing. That means literal nothing, country first, party second. If you fully believe in the project of democratic socialism, or even social democracy, or even social liberalism, if you believe in that project, then you must therefore also believe that it's good for the country. If you're joining a political party, you're joining that political party because of the vision that it puts forward, the ideology it represents. The Conservatives represent conservatism, the Liberal Democrats represent liberalism, the Labour Party represent Labourism, or social democracy or socialism, like some mix of the two, some kind of roundabout amalgamation of socialism and social democracy. If you believe in that project, you must then also believe that it is good for the country. That means that putting the country first is implementing the ideological policies that you believe best benefit the country. I believe the country is best when things are more equal, when workers control more of the means of production, where workers have more access to capital, where certain minorities have equal rights with others, right? We believe in equality broadly and equity. Here on the left, here on the kind of progressive side of the equation. That's what we believe in. We don't believe in it because it's some kind of a hobby horse. We don't believe in it because we think it's good for us. We believe it's good for the country. We believe it creates the best society. This idea that abandoning all of your principles is best for the country, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Again, it's just a nonsense answer, a complete nonsense answer.
The manifesto. If the answer is no, then we're not doing it. Because
Understood.
I think our party got too far from the country and from working people, I've put it back where I think it should always have been.
I ask you because I've covered politics for an awfully long time.
You are a
What people
liar.
say in their manifestos is only a tiny part of what they end up doing because events change. We have to look at your instincts, what you really believe. So let me ask you this. You've got a phrase, which is you're not going to put taxes up for working people, you say. And you won't put VAT up and you won't put
VAT,
income tax.
national insurance, we will not be putting them up.
So viewers have been in touch with us saying, I don't know what working people means. Jamie Oliver works. Is he a working but Victoria Beckham? What about the boss of Tesco? They all work. They're all very well paid. They're arguably very rich. Are they working people?
Well, people who pay their income tax, people who pay national insurance are working people. And that's why we've chosen income tax, national insurance and VAT, but income tax and national insurance paid by working people.
But therefore, rich people paying income tax who do work, they are not going to pay higher taxes under Keir Starmer.
No,
or you're not saying that. You're only just saying something much smaller than that.
I mean, he is saying that, and that's fine. That's fine to say that. Actually, this is one of the main things that actually makes sense. That you're not putting taxes on work up. Rather than saying on working people, if you said taxes on work, that'd be fine. Because that's what income is. Income tax is on work. Capital gains, that's not on work. Wealth taxes, that's on assets, right? But things like specifically national insurance and income tax, those are a payroll tax and a tax on work that you do, on money that you earn from working. Like, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. There's one thing I actually don't necessarily disagree with, even though, of course, the first pledge was to increase income tax on the top 5% of earners, which is a tax on working people, which is, of course, a lie that he originally told. But I'm fine. If he wants to rejig the plans on tax so the corporations and asset-rich people paid more in tax, that'd be great. But they've also not promised any capital gains tax rises, and they've ruled out wealth taxes, which are the taxes we want to be able to see. They haven't even talked about rejigging council tax, the most unfair tax in the country.
No, across the board for income tax, for national insurance and for VAT, there will be no increases. But Nick, that is why this manifesto is a plan for change, a plan for growth. And I know you say it's just a manifesto. I said yesterday, no surprises, no rabbits out the hat. That is 4 years'
I don't
work.
mean you've a secret plan. I mean that the things happen and people have to react. And people want to know how you might react. Let me put an example to you, if I could. You see, people note what you're not saying. They know you are saying that you won't increase certain taxes, but they note that you're not replying when asked questions. I don't want to waste your time and I don't want to waste the viewers' time. But there are working people, for example, people who build up a small business, go and sell it. They make what's called a capital gain.
No, that's not a tax on work, though. If they're an owner, they are not a worker. If you're being taxed on your assets, that's not assets that you've gained from working. That's assets you've gained from owning. That's the difference here, Nick. This is. You've studied politics. You've almost certainly a PPE grad. You know how Marxists view the difference between proletariat and bourgeois. This is very simple political economy. Stop bullshitting here, Nick.
It's worth more than when they bought it in the first place. It might be a newsagent or a florist. Is Labour going to increase the tax that working person pays in capital gains?
Nick, all of our plans are set out in a manifesto.
So they might.
Let me finish the sentence. All our plans are set out in the manifesto, fully costed, fully funded, and none of them, all launched yesterday, require tax increases over and above the ones we've set out. We are going to deal with the non-dom tax status. We are going to deal with the private equity loophole. We are going to deal with the tax break for private schools and the tax that we need to introduce or to extend on oil and gas companies. But none of our plans require any other tax rises.
No.
But
But plans change, just like Sir Keir Starmer's opinions change,
Nick,
events change,
Nick.
and it's possible, isn't it? If you're not ruling it out, people who've got a business maybe are going to sell their house and think it's never been charged with capital gains tax before. They've got to think, well, maybe these guys will need the money, like the experts say, and they'll come for me.
Nick, you let me explain. Unlike some Labour leaders that may have sat in a chair like this in an interview with you, my manifesto is about wealth creation. This is a party of wealth creation, of growth. And therefore, this boxing in...
Yeah, and wealth creation and growth means nothing unless you can tell us where that wealth creation and growth is going to go. Not that this manifesto is necessarily about wealth creation and growth. I don't think that it is. I think it's pretty weak on both of those things, to be fair. But we'll see anyway when it comes to be inputted into policy, because they'll win the election on the back of this manifesto with a pretty large majority. But who is going to be generating the wealth? Sure, you want to have this local power plant, very tiny amount of investment of the overall GB energy investment going to go in locally owned energy projects, right? That's fine. That's some local community wealth that you're creating there, and that's good. But the money that you're giving to just private businesses, like, unless you're going to properly talk about how we deal with the disparity between the high paid and the low paid, which you don't want to take action on, that's going to flow up to the rich. If you don't tax wealth, where the rich people have been taking all of these proceeds, pumping this liquidity into assets to increase those prices so they can only be afforded by rich people, that growth is going to flow up to the rich. And that wealth is going to be created for the rich. You've not shown me, at least not in the manifesto anyway, how this growth and this wealth that you've created is going to be this broad base that Rachel Reeves talked about in her Mays lecture. Like, I don't see it. I don't see where this is coming from.
That everybody is trying to do, particularly in recent days, that the only levers available to a Labour government or Labour Prime Minister is to sort of put up tax or pull down spending. I reject that. There is
Understood.
Growth is the lever that I intend to pull. That's why this plan is so carefully thought through.
Just want to ask you one more on this. You said something that caught people's attention the other day. You said you wouldn't use private healthcare, even if somebody was in real need.
Who cares?
It made some people think you're hostile to that. And when you and I spoke in a very personal interview that we did some time ago, you told me the story, a very moving story about your mother who's very ill, worked in the health service for a long time. And you told me, which I have to say surprised me at the time, that she gripped your hand and said to you, don't let your dad go private.
Yeah.
Are you hostile to people who go private? Do you think they're queue jumpers, that it's unfair?
No, I mean, in relation to my mum, she was obviously very ill for a lot of her life, and I was in a high dependency unit with her when we thought we were going to lose her many, many times. And that's why I relayed that to you. I'm not hostile in the slightest. I completely understand why people would go private. I know people who have because they wanted to have an operation more quickly to get back to work or to get back to something else. Just let me put it in my...
I'm asking for this reason.
No,
You're taxing private schools, or maybe you'll tax private health. He won't give an assurance on capital gains tax. Maybe he's coming for us sometime when things get a bit tough and the numbers don't add up.
Nick, just hear me out on this. I think I was asked, or at least one version of the question was, would you go private to, as it were, skip the waiting list to get an operation done? To which I said, no, that wouldn't be my instinct. I damaged my knee playing football a few years ago, meniscus.
What's funny, right, is that I fully agree with Starmer here. I absolutely 100% agree with Starmer. If you do get private healthcare, you are literally jumping the queue. You're pushing the queue back and getting in there first because you have access to additional wealth because of how rich you are. What's funny about this, though, is that this is an admission that there isn't spare capacity in the private health sector. It is, of course, all the same capacity with mostly the same physical facilities and the same staff, because most private healthcare staff are NHS workers who are doing overtime in the private sector. So by saying and admitting that he thinks that private healthcare users are jumping the queue, which I agree with, he's admitting that his healthcare plan of using the private sector to bring down the waiting list doesn't work. Because it's true it won't work because there's no spare capacity. But it's only because it's not spare capacity that it's jumping the queue. It's not taking the strain off the healthcare service, like a bunch of these private healthcare advocates will tell you. Well, it's great to use private healthcare because that means fewer people are using the NHS. No, they're using the same staff in the same facilities, just through a private avenue, which jumps the queue. He's admitting that his own healthcare policy doesn't work, which I find quite...
This was torn. I had a scan, I waited my turn, I went to the NHS, got it fixed, and I was back playing football. That's what happened. On acute care, because then the version of the question is, well, what about acute care? In emergency acute care. The NHS is the single best place if you've got an acute problem. And that is why even in the private hospitals, they refer into the NHS for acute care. If I had an acute care life-threatening issue for me or my family, the very best place to be is in the NHS.
Understood. I mentioned at the beginning of the interview that in 3 weeks' time, you could spend your first night in Downing Street. It's possible that you will get a call on that night, a call perhaps from the White House, asking you to join military action for an unforeseen crisis. I asked you if you were ready at the top. Are you ready to act like your predecessors, Tony Blair, Margaret Thatcher perhaps, to use British military power and to project that abroad?
I mean, everybody who wants to be Prime Minister should be prepared for military action. But you've prepared this question, Nick, saying, what if the White House calls you? To which the correct answer, of course, is, well, not if the White House says it. I'm not a dancing monkey. I don't just say how high when Joe Biden or Anthony Blinken or God forbid Donald Trump says start jumping. That's not how this is supposed to work. One of his pledges, let's remember, chat, one of his pledges is that military action should only be undertaken with a vote in the Commons, unless, of course, it strikes against Houthi militias in Yemen, to which he obviously went back on this pledge, otherwise known as a lie that he told before. So it'll be really interesting whether or not he brings this up right now, because I fully believe that he would be very ready to jump into bed with the Atlanticists and allow the White House to direct UK foreign policy, because we don't have independent foreign policy, and I reckon he'd probably bypass the Commons vote as well.
Ready to take whatever action we need to take to defend our country and to protect our country. That is the first duty of any government. It's why the Labour government back in the day signed the NATO treaty. It's why the Labour government back in the day was the first to go down the road of nuclear deterrent. So I'm ready to do whatever is necessary to defend our country.
Why did the other Keir Starmer, this Keir Starmer, say to the Labour Party to get elected that there'd be no more illegal wars, you said? I'll introduce a Prevention and Military Intervention Act. That doesn't sound like a Keir Starmer who's willing to take military
It's worth
action.
reading precisely what I said. I said we wouldn't be taking military action if there wasn't a sound legal basis for it. Well, that's absolutely right. That's why all governments now publish their legal advice, and it wouldn't be fair to put our armed forces in a position where they're risking their lives when we had not been assured ourselves that it was legal. The second thing I said is that we'd have to have an absolutely clear aim and outcome. So that is actually to codify what David Cameron actually did, which was to say, these are the basics, and we need the approval of Parliament if it's sustained for those basics.
No, you didn't say, but it's on the record that you opposed the Iraq war.
That's pretty well to codify the current situation.
Understood. You didn't say, but it's only fair to say.
I mean, it is true. I think that does marry up with this original pledge. I just don't believe him. Like, I just don't believe that he would only go to war if there was a sound legal basis. Like, I don't believe you care.
Say that you marched against the Iraq war, you were clear where you were. There are some of your supporters, some people will no doubt be voting for you, who hope, particularly if Donald Trump's elected, and of course that's nothing to do with you, whether he is or he isn't, you know what they hope for. They want you to be like Hugh Grant in the movie. They want a Love Actually moment. Are you prepared to stand alongside an American president and publicly say, no, Mr. President?
Well, I'll deal with each situation as it arises. We don't simply do what any other country asks us to do. Every case has to be looked at on its merits. That is a very special relationship. It'll always be a special relationship with the US, whoever is the president. Obviously, it'll be up to the American people to decide who that is. And we and I, if we're elected into government, will deal with whoever is president of the United States.
What other topic? You've done money. We've talked about security.
I mean, it's a fine answer. I just don't believe you. Like, I just don't believe you won't just do what the Americans tell you. But it's a good answer at the very least.
Security, we haven't talked about borders. No time to do it in detail. I simply want to ask you again, if you'll forgive me, about this. You see, in this, the Keir Starmer manifesto from 2019, it says we need to defend migrants' rights and argue for free movement in the EU. Doesn't that tell you whose side you're really on when it comes to the debate about migration?
Well, let's take free movement. That was part and parcel of our membership of the EU. We've left the EU. Freedom of movement is over. And there's no...
But you said we should make the argument for freedom of movement as we leave the EU. So it's not about whether or not we have freedom of movement before. It's about whether we have it now. And you're now saying that you don't want it. And you said that we should have it in 2019. So you lied. That's a lie that you told.
Case for bringing it
You
back.
argued for it after Brexit.
I said as we were negotiating the exit from the EU, but that's done. We're out. We're not going back, and therefore we're not having freedom of movement.
I mean, you could renegotiate it. That's a thing you could do. I understand why you're not doing it. Again, this is clearly a political choice. I don't think we should be arguing for free movement as we leave the EU. I think it was a bad pledge. I think that we should accept the fact that people didn't want free movement, and we should find a new paradigm under a new economy as globalization stops. That's fine. But doesn't mean you didn't lie, though.
Movement. What we need is fair rules, robust rules, properly applied, so that we can have the managed immigration that we need for our economy, but not lose control, which is the position under this government. We've got record numbers at the moment because we haven't got the skills.
The question was using a phrase you used in a speech.
Yeah, but
the most powerful question in politics, you said once, whose side are you on? And people think when they hear that, oh, I know whose side he's on. He's not on the side of us.
I'm on the side of working people. And I took the decision that after 4 election losses, there's a lot of analysis of the 2019 election.
It's very funny to me that Nick Robinson is continually taking the position that actually Keir Starmer is more left-wing than he lets on, and those pledges were the original thing that he means, and the manifesto is a lie. And I'm just like, what world do you live in, Nick? Of course he doesn't believe these things. Are you crazy? No, the pledges were the lies. I mean, I don't think he believes in anything. I think he'll just say whatever it takes to be able to get elected, and we'll let other people do it. He'll subcontract out policy to the Tony Blair Institute and to Labour Together and Pat McFadden and Shabana Mahmood and all of these people. He believes in nothing. He's an empty suit, an empty husk of individual who's allowed himself to be controlled by people in the background, shady figures in the background, who he subcontracts out his positions to. I don't think he has any genuine positions, but the idea that the current cadre, the current Politburo in charge of the party, want to defend the rights of migrants, that's complete nonsense. This idea that Nick Robinson is framing this as though actually he really is on the side of migrants, as if migrants aren't on the side of regular people, as if this is like some kind of fundamental material conflict between migrants and everybody else. That's some really disgusting politics that Nick Robinson is essentially taking as read in the way he's framed this question. Just your average BBC things, I guess.
Election loss, and I get that. But people forget the Labour Party had lost 4 elections in a row. We'd drifted too far from working people. And Nick, then I came into politics in 2015. By the time I was leader of the Labour Party, I'd been through 3 elections we'd lost. I then got thumped in Hartlepool about a year after I took over as leader. And I learned from experience, draw on experience. And my analysis was this party is too far from the country, and I'm prepared to do whatever change I need to do to put it in the right place. And that's what I've done with a steely determination. And I'm not going to...
And again, like, if you'd have just said that in the leadership election, it would have been fine. If you'd not lied in the leadership election, it would have been fine. It wouldn't have been a problem. If you just said, I understand that you guys think that migration is good, but you are out of step with the country. If we want to win elections, we need to try and move ourselves towards popular opinion on something like migration. Again, something that the Labour Party of old definitely agreed more with Keir Starmer than it does now. Like, Tony Blair is the pro-immigration Prime Minister who is kind of outside of regular old-school Labour Party values. And then it'll be fine. If you'd have won the election promising these things, not a problem. It's fine. You have this mandate. But he doesn't have that mandate because he lied in 2020.
Going to apologise for that?
Well, indeed. Let me ask you then to address a voter who's still got to worry, okay? Because you said there were people to persuade. What do you say to a voter who wonders if they can really trust a man who says he's changed from the Brexit-hating, tax-raising, industry nationalising, Corbyn praising, self-declared socialist.
Why should we want these people's votes? If they hate everything we believe in, if they fundamentally ideologically disagree with us, they can't be convinced. If we change our positions to align with this person's anti-socialist, anti-liberal, anti-progressive views, then we haven't won an argument. They have won the argument. We have not created a convert. People always talk about this idea, oh, the left wants to identify traitors and the right wants to win converts. And I think this is a good criticism of the left. The left do a circular firing squad all the time, and they don't want to be able to win people over and try and have those discussions and have those arguments. Fundamentally, an excellent criticism of the state of the modern left. We are inwardly thinking, we are insular, we don't entertain disagreement, and we try and weed each other out in purity testing rather than trying to build a broad base. That's correct. Excellent criticism of the left. But that's about selling our ideas to other people to win them over. Whereas this voter, who fundamentally doesn't disagree with the current position of the Labour Party, is just worried that they are saying it dishonestly. If we, as leftists, just adopt all of these people's positions, they've won. We are the converts. We've not converted anybody. They have converted us into being conservative. And that's what's happened to Keir Starmer. He has converted the Labour Party into a conservative party. He has not converted the public to being Labour supporters. It's as simple as that. And that's not purity testing for me to say so. It's not a purity test for me to expect a democratic socialist party to not abandon democratic socialism.
Went to work in Northern Ireland, and I said I would, with others, change the police service of Northern Ireland to make sure that it gained the confidence of both communities. So I said what I...
He's going to say, after this, I then became head of the Crown Prosecution Service. I said I would change it as Director of Public Prosecutions, and I changed it. He's going to say it, I promise you, chat.
I would do, and I changed it. I then led the Crown Prosecution Service. I said I would change it to make sure that it better protected victims, particularly in sexual cases. I said I'd do it.
It's too easy. It's too easy, chat. The man's a fucking robot. The man is just an NPC. Press E to talk. I used to be a warrior like you, but then I took an arrow in the knee. My responses are limited. You must ask the right questions.
Did it. I came in and led the Labour Party. I said I would change it to put it back in a position to win elections. And over 4.5 years, I've done it with a steely determination. So every time I've said, gone into a leadership role and said, this is what I'm going to do, I then delivered it. So I stand on my record. And
no, you became leader of the Crown Prosecution Service. You said that you would change it, and you did. When you became leader of the Labour Party, you told people the 2017 manifesto was a foundational document. We needed to make the moral case for socialism, that you believed in taking the momentum of 2017 and 2019 and making it electable. You did not say you wanted to change the Labour Party into becoming a Conservative Party. You did not say a single fucking thing about changing the Labour Party into a Conservative Party. You didn't say anything of the sort, right? Again, if you'd have just admitted it, if you'd have just said that's what you wanted to do when you were trying to get elected, nobody would have an issue. You would have that mandate and you would be right to implement that mandate. You have no fucking mandate for this shit by just lying. Again, because the man's lied. Man just absolutely lied. He just lies. That's all he does. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for memberships. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.